Well, welcome. We are grateful for your presence. We're glad that we could be together. My name is Deborah McKnight. I'm the founding pastor at Urban Abbey. We are a United Methodist New Church Start, and you can hear me echoing now, but that will be fixed. And so we're glad that you're here. We're grateful the folks who have joined us on Zoom and the folks who will join us on Facebook Live as well. And we invite you to take a deep breath in and exhale and pause in this time as we gather with one another, as we lean into this time and as we give thanks. And so I want to welcome our partners from the Big Garden. And I want to invite this month is our partnership with the Big Garden. And we have done that partnership ever since we started. We will be on our 10th year. In the next year, we'll turn 10. And so we're glad to be together. And as we gather, I want to invite Nathan Morgan to start us off to share a little bit about the Big Garden and about his role in the Big Garden, and to invite other folks to share as well.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Nathan Morgan. I'm the executive director of the Big Garden, and I wanted to talk a little bit about our heritage and our history, which is connected closely with the United Methodist Church. The Big Garden was founded in 2005 as a program of an older organization called United Methodist Ministries, which itself was founded back in the 1960s here in Omaha as a response to a lot of the social issues that were swirling in those days. The Methodist Church then decided that there should be a dedicated office to social justice in the Omaha metro area. The organization did many things over the years. At one point, there was a public affairs television program, all sorts of things. And then in 2005, there was a recognition that there were parts of our city where people didn't have easy access to fresh produce, where people lived in what's called food deserts, where there were no grocery stores. And at that point, the Big Garden was started as a response to that. The idea was, at least for the first summer, to build 12 community gardens in food desert areas in Omaha. So at least during the growing season, people would have fresh produce and also would have a space to gather, to connect with one another. That idea has had some legs to it. Over the past 15 years, we now have some 170 some gardens split about equally between the Omaha Metro and other communities in Nebraska and Kansas. So we're grateful to be here. We're very grateful for the partnership with the Urban Abbey. It's one of our longest standing partnerships, and it's one that we really value and appreciate being able to be in ministry together. Let me introduce some of my colleagues now who are on the call as well. We'll all be answering your questions, doing our best. I said we might virtually arm wrestle for them as we move through the evening, but we'll start off with Jamie. Do you want to introduce yourself and then hand it off to the next person?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Troba, and I am the Director of Communications at the Big Garden. And I've been with the Big Garden since, well, for about 11 years now. And I've gotten to see our transition into the work that we're doing now, focused on community gardening and food security. And so that's been a really fun transition to be a part of. Yeah, that's all I'll say right now. But I would like to hand it over. How about Stephanie?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Director of Education at the Big Garden, a newly appointed title in the midst of 2020. So that's been a fun challenge. Use the term fun. But it's been really good. I've been very honored to have been recognized within the organization and brought into the role. So I oversee programs like our middle school after school programming called Garden to Table, our farm to school program for elementary and younger, Growing Gardeners, which we host throughout the week for adults and families to learn how to grow food. We also have lots of other events that I hand off to my team members, and they do a really great job orchestrating those things. I've been with the Big Garden. This is my 4th year, and it's been really wonderful to be a part of this organization and working within the community. And that's all I'll say for myself. I'll pass it off to Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Higgins. She, her, hers as well. I recognize some of your faces, and hello to y'all. For those of you who I've never met before, I'm glad you're here. I first actually did the New Roots internship with the Big Garden in 2015. That was not my first foray into working with local foods or doing education around food with children, but it was definitely the deepest I'd been at that point. I maybe cried a few times because preschoolers are very overwhelming, especially when you're in the garden with them. But I got over that feeling and fell in love with the work. I worked on a few farms that fall and worked at City Sprouts the following year, but I couldn't stay away from the Big Garden. I think I'm the only person who's ever done the internship twice, so I did it again in 2017. And then Nathan invited me to stay on at the end of that part-time, and then I joined the staff full-time in 2018, both as an educator and then coordinating a program called Giving Grow, where we plant little orchards all over Omaha. We've planted 20 orchards so far, and we are hoping to plant 10 more this year if I can manage to find enough people interested in orchards. Last year, in response to COVID, Nathan and Matt were having a lot of conversations with some folks from around the city, and we started another internship called Siembra Raíces, Siembra Nebraska, and I was asked to head up that as well. So I'm now coordinating both of those programs. Last year, the interns helped us grow, I think it was 12,000 pounds of food at gardens all over the city and a few outside of the city, and they just started 2 weeks ago, and they are started back. 9 of them are returning from last summer and fall, and they're really excited to be doing this work again. So Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, hello, Matt Freeman, he, him. So title is Chief Operations Officer. Got a finger in a lot of different things. So I started with the Big Garden. I did the internship back in 2010 with a lot of wonderful people. Came back and worked out of a garage for a while, bummed around, found my way into a full-time role. And I originally committed 3 years to the Big Garden, and then I was supposed to go off to graduate school, and I'm now entering, I think, year 8 of my 3-year commitment. So that's going really well. No, so that's good. Yeah, been around for a while. Been really fortunate to be a part of some incredibly important work, and I'm excited to talk to y'all tonight.
Well, I'm grateful that we're all here and that we're all together. And thank you for taking time to be with us and to give energy to the work and to our partnership. I want to invite you to give us all a little background on what the language of food insecurity is, and who it affects and how it relates to folks. And so I want to invite you to, you all can discern as the Spirit moves, um, what what do we need to know as lay people who don't work in the big garden, about food justice and food insecurity and who it affects.
Well, I'm happy to start, but I'll hand off to my colleagues pretty quickly. Food insecurity is simply not having enough food to live a healthy and a successful life. There's a very technical definition that the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, has. That's when an individual or a family doesn't have enough food for at some point during the month, is how they technically define it. Basically, it's when people go hungry because they can't afford enough food. The notion of food justice and food sovereignty are much deeper and powerful, and I think more important concepts to understand than food security. I think the field is evolving towards a better understanding of those concepts. And I want to open it up to my colleagues to see if anybody wants to jump in and talk more about that evolution, both in the field, but also how we are thinking about those topics.
I think these are huge topics, and if other questions today, we probably can't get to every single aspect. Food insecurity, food justice, food sovereignty. I think it was actually Stephanie who introduced me to the idea not that long ago of food apartheid. That when we say food security, it sounds like something that's just happened, that people just don't have enough, and we're not sure how it happened. But my mom and dad both grew up in South Omaha, where there's a lot of food deserts at this time. And my mom tells me about how many grocery stores there were in South Omaha when she was growing up in the 60s and 70s. And I think, from what I've heard, quite similar in most of North Omaha, that you could throw a shoe and hit a grocery store, or a corner market that at least had the basics. And it was actually intentional decisions on the part of grocery store chains to close locations in what were deemed dangerous parts of town during the civil rights era. And I've also heard the phrase grocery store redlining used, that just like people of certain races, African Americans, especially in Omaha, were not allowed to own property or rent in certain parts of the city. Grocery stores just decided they weren't going to have chains in certain parts of the city. And even when you go to grocery store chains in food deserts, when you go to those grocery stores, you can see a huge difference in what is available at those grocery stores, the quality of the produce, the access to healthy, whole foods is lacking in parts of the city that are underserved still. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this isn't something that just happened. This was intentional choices on the parts of many, many companies and individuals to keep a lot of people from having easy access to food that is nourishing. And so even if they do have the money, if they don't have the time, if they don't have the transportation, how are they going to get food that it's going to support health? I wonder if my other coworkers have things to add those points.
Yeah. And to build on that food apartheid, commercial farms are the ones that are subsidized, and cash crops on a large scale are the ones that are subsidized, not the smaller farms that are producing our fruits and vegetables. Food justice also encompasses the labor, the people who are working on those farms to pick and harvest and care for that food. Food sovereignty would be having in those grocery stores African heritage foods, foods for Latinx cuisine. We have to go to a specialty market if you want something for Asian inspired meals. They aren't in the mainstream grocery stores. So yeah, just to build on what Aaron was saying.
Yeah, and just real quick, like with food insecurity, when we are just talking about sort of the basics, like one of the ways that I throw it to folks is, if we were to talk about financial security or financial insecurity, folks immediately have a point of reference for it. So talking about it through that lens is one way I try to get people's mind wrapped around it real quick. I do think there's been this movement in the time that I've been with the organization, even where, we're talking about food insecurity, then we're talking about food justice, now we're talking about food apartheid, where like the intention behind our unequal distribution of resources and all sorts of things that go with it in our society, those are intentional. And it's important to acknowledge that as we approach this work. So I think like that's a progression that I think is really important to pay attention to in the time that I've been here. Another thing, just as we're talking about food insecurity in the community, is it's a much larger problem than I think a lot of people comprehend. It's a much larger issue. So the figures you see all over the place for 1 in 5 or 1 in 6, is a pretty standard number, but it's 1 in 3 in communities of color, showing that things are not equal. But beyond that, if you were to look at like USDA standards, an imperfect tool for free and reduced lunch, I think people would be blown away to see a map of the city of Omaha and the percentages of kids in our city who qualify. And to break it down even further, sometimes I'll talk about, look, if it's 1 in 5 or if it's 1 in 3, or if 75% of the kids in the school, qualify by this standard, like we're not just, this is not an abstraction. It's not a small thing, right? Folks who are food insecure are represented in every congregation, in every classroom, on every sports team. Like it's a pretty pervasive problem, and I don't think a lot of folks really have their mind wrapped around it. And I also just want to take 1 second here and give a shout out to Reverend Stephanie Allsweed, who's on the call, who is our founding executive director. I saw her chime in there and wanted to say hello.
Thanks, Matt and Stephanie and Aaron for sharing. With growing on what Matt has shared, can you all share a little bit about what you see in your garden work and in your work with folks in the city around what does hunger look like, and then maybe particular in what food insecurity the role it impacts on nutrition, on diet, on illness, on obesity, on some of the impacts that are larger. If there's not a grocery store that's the Aaron's measurement of like being able to throw a shoe and hit, where do people eat? What's the food that people get if they cannot throw a shoe at a grocery store?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what Matt was talking about in terms of the numbers of people in our community who are experiencing food insecurity. according to the Omaha Community Foundation's Landscape Project, which was a report that they put out in, I think it encompassed 2018 and 19, if I remember right. And according to this report, in Omaha, 92,000 of our neighbors experience food insecurity. And that was before COVID and so many job losses and losses of income. So just think about that, 92,000 of our neighbors. I just find that number staggering. And that comes out to about 11% of Omaha. And of that 11%, 21% of those experiencing food insecurity are in Northeast Omaha, and 16% are in Southeast Omaha. Also 12% are in Potawatomi County, just across the river. And as Matt alluded to, 75% of the kids in OPS are eligible to receive free and reduced lunches through the government. And so that indicates the level, their family's level of income and eligibility. So I just find those numbers really important to think about and pretty mind-blowing. Nathan, do you want to talk about diet-related illness and nutrition?
I can talk a little about that. And just to piggyback on what you said, Jamie, just this week, the Community Foundation put out a COVID update to their landscape. And I was looking at that this week. The food insecurity rate in Douglas, Sarpy, and Potawatomi counties is up by 43% for this year. And so take that 92,000 people and add another, I think the number, I may be wrong, but I think the number was about 80,000 people who have had to receive emergency food support in this past year. So it's a scale at which we've not seen in modern times, I don't think. If you ever want a sobering experience, and I'm not sure they're still doing this, but Together has for months now had a drive-through food pantry. Several months ago, I was driving down Leavenworth Street. Together is at 24th and Leavenworth, and the cars stretched from 24th and Leavenworth all the way to 480 on the right-hand side, waiting to get emergency food support. So it's a situation that we've never really dealt with before. I'll talk a little about the nutritional effects long-term, but again, my colleagues are even more experienced and knowledgeable on this than I am. When someone doesn't have access to nutritious, healthy food on a regular basis, living in a what's sometimes called a food desert, but the newer terminology now is a food swamp, where it's not that there is no food available, it is that the food available there is not high quality, and that's by design. That what people eat is what they can get access to. If you don't have a car, if you don't have reliable transportation, then you're eating from the nearest corner store or gas station. And the quality of food you get there is very low, which leads to a prolonged diet of these things leads to hypertension, diabetes, obesity, all sorts of things. The even more frightening experience that happens is often kids. These are the primary foods they're getting access to as well. And I don't know the exact age at which kids' dietary habits sort of get locked in, but it's pretty young. I've heard anything from 7 to 9 years old, maybe even earlier. So that was one of the motivations for us when we began doing educational programming in earnest. Was let's focus on the kiddos. If we can try to change their notions about what tastes good, about what they're excited to eat, then maybe we've got a fighting chance to head off some of these longer term health impacts. And I'll toot our own horn just a little bit here. Our evaluations show that in our classes, there is a measurable impact on the amount of fresh produce kids eat and the frequency with which they eat it when we do pre and post tests for our programming. But I don't want to hog the mic here. Aaron, Stephanie, Matt, any of you have anything to add that I forgot?
I can speak a little bit about free and reduced lunch programs, and I just want to acknowledge that those exist in our country because of the Black Panthers. I'm not getting that wrong, right? They were the people who introduced the idea during the civil rights era. And I know a lot of families rely on free and reduced lunch and breakfast programs in order to make sure their children have 3 meals a day. That was a huge issue right at the beginning of COVID. I don't know if anyone's seeing memories on Facebook. I don't know if people are still on Facebook from last year, but there was a big push to send families home with lunch and breakfast for all of their children about a year ago, because so many families rely on those programs to feed their children. And I'm almost, I don't think I've been in a school during lunch or breakfast recently. Octavia is chiming in. Yeah, and saying that most of the educators, their first question was, how will our students eat? And my parents grew up trying their best, but they had 5 children. We lived across the river in Council Bluffs, and I was the only reason I had 3 meals a day growing up is because of free and reduced lunch programs. And I don't think things have changed too much, but like pizza was an option at breakfast and lunch. Like the quality of food at school, I think there was a salad bar, but it like no one ever wanted to eat it because it wasn't very good. I would try and it was gross. Like it was poor quality produce, to be perfectly honest. And so for 5 days a week, 2 of my meals were at school from like K through 12. And I ate a lot of pizza because that was what was available. And it's amazing that that is an option for so many people, that they don't have to worry about their kids having no food. But it would be, I just wish we could see changes to what is being fed to children in schools with those dollars that the government is spending on that. And yeah, a lot of the kids that we work with, I was primarily an educator with the Big Garden for a long time. Like we're introducing vegetables to them sometimes for the first time. And I'm not surprised when it's a preschooler that I'm introducing a vegetable to, but it's not uncommon that I'll bring cauliflower, or it wasn't uncommon when I was going into middle schools that I would bring cauliflower. And like, it was the first time they'd really tried cauliflower. They're 11, 12, 13 years old. And yeah, Nathan was saying that kids' tastes are set quite early on. And that's an extra hurdle that we're facing as educators going and trying to teach kids about healthy eating, is like they've never had a lot of the things that we're bringing in before, and they taste kind of gross if you're not used to them. So finding recipes that make cauliflower delicious, for instance, it's actually one of the most fun thing being an educator at the Big Garden, is like, how can I dress this up so a middle schooler is going to like this vegetable? I don't know if I'm getting off topic there, but I tend to do that. Jamie, Stephanie, Matt, do you have things to add on the topic of health and food security, food justice?
Kind of, not really. More like you can really see that systemic portion of things when you talk about how they're not feeding kids super healthy things, and that's when their eating patterns are locked in. So that helps to perpetuate that cycle of poverty and of food insecurity. how yeah, you're eating highly processed foods, you're getting hypertension, you're getting diabetes, all those things. Then they're stuck in the health cycle of not feeling very well to work, or having to go to the hospital for medications and things like that, which keeps them from breaking out of poverty. So yeah, that just kind of highlights that it's a system and it's working very well.
Yeah, I think that's an aspect of food security that we don't quite think about often enough, is the quality of the food that people consume. It's not just a matter of getting calories, your tuna noodle helper, hamburger helper, whatever that the pantry might be giving out. It's also important to be having regular regular access to fresh produce.
I also want to acknowledge pantries around town are doing the best with the hand that they're dealt. I was talking to someone who runs a pantry in North Omaha and does hundreds of deliveries to homebound seniors every week, and serves so many people at the pantry location itself. And they have, at that organization, absolutely no budget for the food that they're giving out. That pantry director has to find all of the food that is given away to everyone who needs it for free. And so they do their best to find healthy food. I was in there the other week for a moment, and they had gotten a bunch of donations from Hy-Vees that were having like prepackaged like fruit and cheese cups that they might have been throwing out otherwise. And so people are doing their best running these pantries, but it's still not like, yeah, I want to acknowledge that point. And Pastor P is here and is asking, why are we not addressing the food choices with OPS food service? And that's a really great question. It's just like, how many hours are there in the day? And how many issues are there with our food system right now? That is an issue that needs to be addressed. And I wish I had 3 more days in every week so that I could address all of the issues that I want to. It's probably going to take more than 3 days every week. Probably 2 weeks in 1 week would be great. Yeah, just acknowledging that like everyone's trying, all the people who are doing this work in this community are trying so hard. And it's just the problem is so large and so multifaceted.
And I think the Council Bluffs Public Schools, and I'm speaking in an area where I'm not exceptionally well versed, but I feel like Council Bluffs Public Schools is a little further ahead in looking at like sourcing food locally, sourcing healthy foods. Maybe they can do that because it's a smaller district. I don't know sort of what that difference is, but I know that they've been working on it for years, and they might be a good example that we can connect with. And yeah, like, so I do want to shout out for anybody who does the pantry side of things, that like the focus on nutrition in pantries is light years ahead of where it was when I started interacting with this work for the very first time. And there is this focus on, better diets, choice pantries, fresh produce. I think, leaps and bounds ahead of where it was. But there's still the focus on getting folks calories, rather than nutrition. And yeah, it's hard. And when you look at like what it takes to eat healthy, and like the education that it takes, I probably wouldn't have a clue what actually goes into a healthy diet if I didn't do this for my job. Like, I've gotten so much education because I work in this area, and I have for a long time, that I understand it so much better. But there's a lot that we aren't taught about our diets. There's a lot that's not intentional about our diets. But when you look at like what's affordable, what's cheap, what what you can get at a grocery store if you're lucky enough to have one, or a corner store, a gas station. um, cheap cheap food might get you calories. It's not getting you sustenance. And so it's not just the emergency food system. It's also the way that we're interacting with uh, the market here. I know that there was in a previous administration a focus on nutrition around schools, and that another administration came in and wanted to flip all that on its head. And reading those racial overtones is not difficult. So you got to call that out too when you see it.
Why don't we connect into a little bit more about the pantries and how can fresh produce be available? Pastor Portia mentioned that OPS introduces and distributes a vegetable or fruit every Thursday. And I know that she has been doing a lot of work with distributing big boxes of vegetables and fruits and other resources. With the work of the Big Garden, how are you all connected to supporting or involved with the pantry systems? Or what do you see in terms of your work with how fresh produce can get to the pantries?
Yeah, I can jump on this real quick, and I'll let my colleagues take it further and in a more intelligent direction than I can. So when we survey our gardens, consistently over 90% of our gardens they contribute produce to a food pantry. That's a central purpose to why these gardens exist. Over 160 gardens in 3 different states, a whole lot in Omaha. So growing food for pantry distribution has always been something that we do. And another thing that I want to highlight and make sure folks are aware of is with the pandemic, there's been this extra response from the USDA distributing these food boxes far and wide. And something that we're doing this year is we're working with local pantries, surveying clients in different parts of the city, and trying to cater what we're growing through Siembra this year as like a culturally appropriate supplement to those boxes, so that we're filling some of the void and getting folks the right foods, and trying to focus our efforts with our crew and with our partnership with the Latino Center, with Literal Acres in Production, trying to grow that way. So just wanted to offer those 2 things, and then I'll let folks take it from there.
I know that we have built gardens and helped maintain gardens at quite a few pantries around town. Matt was just telling us today that he's scheduled a reboot of the garden at Clare Memorial, where Pastor Portia is doing an amazing job with the pantry there. We also have started planting orchards at pantries, as well as other organizations around town as well. Although fruit trees take a little bit longer to start producing than gardens do. So the orchards we planted in 2018, we'll be getting our first harvests off of those this year, if all goes according to plan. But yeah, there's always more room to expand and improve upon those partnerships. Yeah, I would love to see, sometimes someone might get produce in their box or in their bag that they pick up at a pantry that week. Some pantries are choice pantries around town. Others don't have the capacity to have a choice pantry, you have to basically set up a small grocery store inside of a building to make that happen. So they have to pre-bag things and then put them in people's cars or hands as they come by. And I think we've talked about for a long time and just need to make this happen, like handing out recipes, simple, easy, delicious recipes to go along with produce that people might not know what to do with. Because you can give someone, I don't know, kale, but if they don't know what it is and they don't know how to make it taste good, like no one, I don't know. I don't know anyone who's like, actually I know one person, he's 8. He really eat raw kale and just like straight off the plant. But I can't think of anyone else who's like excited to just put kale in their mouth straight. Like you got to cook that up. And so that's an opportunity we really need to take advantage of, is like getting recipes out. The organizations we partner with more and more, so that when people get food, fresh produce in their boxes, which is that this is happening more and more, it feels like over the years, that they really know how to cook it to make it good, and especially for if they have any kids in the family, like to make sure they're enjoying it too. Other thoughts from anyone else? Partnerships with pantries.
Why don't we, for a more broad kind of perspective, like, can you talk a little bit about why should we grow our own food? What's the benefit, the value, the meaning behind having a garden in your home or having a garden bed somewhere, whether it's through the Big Garden or through another community garden? What's the possibilities of growing food everywhere, and how that would impact our communities and our spaces?
I'll talk a little bit about that, and then of course open it up to folks smarter than I am. One of the reasons I think that it's important is simply that the food's going to taste so much better. Just from a purely selfish standpoint, the tomatoes that we grow at the Big Garden, or that I grow in my backyard, taste so much better than anything that you can get at a grocery store. It doesn't matter whether it's Whole Foods or what. So that's the selfish reason. But a more important reason for me is this notion of food miles. How far is your food traveling to get to your plate in a world that's being racked by climate change, and that's only going to be continuing and increasing? That's something that we need to be conscious of as consumers, that most of the tomatoes we buy in Omaha, regardless of the time of year, come from Mexico or somewhere in Central America or the Central Valley of California. It takes a heck of a lot of energy to get those here, to grow them where they are, and to bring them all the way to Omaha. So they lose nutritional value during that transport, but they lose taste, but they're also putting a whole lot of carbon into the atmosphere while it's happening. So from a climate change mitigation perspective, I think localizing our food system is going to be increasingly important if we're going to be more resilient as a community. I mean, hell, I would love to see, I look at medians on the interstate and I'm thinking, what could we grow there? I'm weird that way, but
what could we grow there, Nathan? What would you plant there?
It'd have to be something pretty hardy, because you're dealing with all sorts of exhaust and salt. But there's possibilities. So as we move into a situation where climate shocks are going to affect the food chain, the distribution chain, the production chain of commercialized agriculture. We saw that last spring. This time of year last spring, farmers in Florida were plowing fresh produce back into the ground because the distribution networks had broken down. At the same time, thousands, maybe millions of people were lining up at food pantries across the country. It was driving me nuts. The same thing was happening in Wisconsin. Dairy farmers were pouring milk down drains because the distribution networks had broken down while babies were going hungry. So, and that's just a preamble to what's going to continue to happen. So localizing our food chain, making sure that as much as we can is produced locally, so that if the Central Valley of California dries up or burns down, both of which are probably much more likely over the next few years, we're not standing there, looking dumbfounded because there's nothing in the produce section at Hy-Vee when we need it. I'll get off. That's a pet issue of mine, so I'll get off that and let some of my colleagues talk about this.
Yeah, Nathan, in terms of thinking about food miles and relocalizing our food system, growing our own food, I think an important piece of that is learning how to eat seasonally. I love strawberries, but we're probably not meant to eat strawberries in January in Nebraska. That's just not sustainable. We need to consider the food miles that our food travels to get to us. And if we're growing our own food, then we become more in touch with the seasons, more in tune with the seasons. And we know when strawberries are ripe in our region. And then they're an extra special treat. We just don't need to necessarily have them available all year round. That's something that we've just gotten used to in our modern food distribution system, our modern groceries, probably since the 1950s, I'm guessing. So yeah, eating locally, growing your own food, and eating in season is going to be an important part as we face climate change, climate resiliency.
Jamie, can you say, or maybe another person, can you add a little bit to, like, what are some resources on how we learn about local, like seasonal patterns, and what foods are maybe, and particularly, I know Big Garden, you all did a conversation last week around plants that should be planted in our region, and plants that can really thrive in our region and can help pollinators and our whole community. And so what are some things that we should be thinking about, or what are resources that could help us learn to eat with reducing our food miles, reducing the impact on the climate, and to be better connoisseurs of our food?
I don't have great resources right off the top of my head. There's an older cookbook that I love called Simply in Season. I know Urban Abbey has carried that at times, but that's a great.
We can find it again if we don't have it.
I bet they can, yes. But yeah, that's a great cookbook that's put out, helping you to learn what produce comes in what season. I would imagine there are resources from the USDA as well. I'm sure there are better resources. Does anyone have ideas about that?
If you were to look up, and some are better than others, but if you were to just Google like what's in season calendar, zone 5A, that's where we're at. There's lots of calendars that tell you when different things are coming ripe. I noticed that Nancy pointed out that growing one's own food and eating locally takes a lot of time and effort, which is very true. Oh my goodness. If you're like trying to grow everything yourself, I have friends who are like trying to do everything themselves, and I can't. I go to the grocery store a lot, once a week at least, usually. But I don't know if everyone here is aware of the two local food aggregators that are in the area. One is out of Harlan, Iowa, called Farm Table Delivery. Sorry, it's been a long couple weeks. My brain's not working quite right. And the other one out of Lincoln is Lone Tree Foods. And if you are wanting to eat locally, that is more food locally. both of those are great resources. You can order online. You have to think ahead a little bit, but you can order online and then they'll deliver into Omaha and Lincoln. And we're a pickup location for farm table delivery. I know there's lots of locations around town for the two different organizations. And you can go pick up food from them that is grown by local farmers, by local producers. But it's also a really good, those would be really good resources for finding out what's in season, because they're refreshing their page each week with what is for sale from local producers right now. And Nathan and Nicole are both putting Lone Tree Foods in the chat, and I'm sure we'll see Farm Table in a second. Gwen also wants to know if we contribute to a local farmers market. We actually started not selling, but giving away produce at a fairly new farmers market, a very new farmers market in North Omaha, right on 24th and Burdett in the OEDC parking lot. I don't think the farmers market even has a name at this point. It's so new. And all of the produce, the fresh produce at that market last year was all pay what you can. So value-added products, handicrafts, that sort of thing, people could charge for those, but all of the produce was pay what you can at that market. And we've been at other markets before, but that was really cool to see people's reactions. I was at almost every market last season, and when I would tell people the food is free, there's often, you could tell when people don't usually get to get fresh produce like that. Just the look on their face, or they would say something outright about how grateful they were. But that's a place that you can come get food from us and support us if you want. You can give donations, but all the food is free. That's on Thursday evenings starting in June.
Aaron, do you want to mention your seed, or no, your plant sale? Is that coming up?
Oh, yeah. Yes. We actually just had our seed share. So if you wanted free seeds, you missed that by 2 or 3 days. But our plant sale is coming up. So we grow a lot of seedlings every year, and a lot of those go to our partnering gardens, schools, pantries, etc. And a lot of them have been going to growing food with the Siembra interns since last season. But we do still sell a lot of those seedlings. It's $2 for vegetable seedlings and fruits, and then $3 for herbs and natives, native grasses, flowers, that sort of thing. And all of that just offsets the cost of growing those seedlings. And we'll do curbside pickup, online ordering, curbside pickup with that because of COVID, or you can come and shop in person as well. And that's mid-April through mid-May. I don't know the exact dates off the top of my head, but we are gearing up for that really soon. Do we teach meat canning? Sorry, I'm just seeing this question. I've meat in my life. In my garden classes with kids, I always had a no meat, not because like I want them to all be vegetarians, but because meat's kind of a cheat for flavor. And I wanted to make sure they were tasting all of the vegetables and fruits that we were giving them. So
maybe
I haven't.
the extension folks would do some canning lessons. The university extension people, maybe they could be a meat.
And Addie's saying, Addie was working at City Sprouts until recently, and they do teach pressure canning, do pressure canning for, but I don't actually know much of any.
And
pressure canning.
Through the Growing Gardeners Workshop series, that's one thing that I want folks to know about. growinggardeners.org, that's a partnership with City Sprouts. They offer more of the workshops than we do right now, but we do bring in lots of different experts on lots of different subjects. So we have had workshops on breaking down hogs and chickens, and basic butchering skills, knife skills, like that runs the whole gambit of foods. That's not just like a vegetarian or vegan thing. Another thing that I wanted to throw out there with like why gardening, why do it, is like the real health benefits of the act of gardening, of being outside, of getting sunlight, of taking in plants and earth. Like there's a very real health value. There's a very real therapeutic value. That's I don't know. That's a huge part of the work that's really important to me. Another thing that I want to throw out there as we're talking about valuable resources. So Hy-Vee, of all food chains, grocery store chains, they have dietitians, a lot of dietitians employed on staff, and you can do, I guess, non-COVID tours of their grocery stores with the dietitians. And there are like, diabetes specific tours. There are other tours. I got just a general tour many years ago, and it's still like I learned so much about navigating where I buy food from this tour. It's wild. It's really valuable. They offer them online since COVID. So that's a thing that I think, if you go to a grocery store often and you're concerned about your diet, it's a good resource. They're invested in it. They do that well. I just have to throw that out there.
Well, thanks, Matt. As
I'd
we
like to
are
add
getting,
before we,
oh, go ahead.
it closed, that to why do it. Leah Pinneman, one of the co-founders of Soulfire Farm and the author of Farming While Black, said to free ourselves, we must feed ourselves. And so if we're going to break apart from this system of food apartheid, we've got to be able to equip ourselves with the tools and the knowledge and the food to sustain ourselves and our communities.
Thanks, Stephanie. We are getting close to the end of our hour or our time together. And this is just a lovely beginning place and an introduction into all of the things that the Big Garden can offer, and many of the partners in our city, and the spaces that invite us and ask us and require us to nudge for change. Before we go, I want to invite all of the garden staff, and I know this wasn't technically one of the questions, but maybe name what is your dream for our city, whether it's like kale on the interstate or something else. What is your dream for gardening in our community? What is your dream for food? Just maybe paint that picture and share your name and role one more time with all of our folks that have joined us online or have joined us on in Zoom. Stephanie, I'll let you go first because your picture is the closest.
Stephanie Finklia, she, her, hers, Director of Education. There's so many things I'd like to see for the city of Omaha: affordable housing, food growing in every community, activities for kids to do, things that don't involve alcohol, places for kids to go, outdoor centers, public spaces that are accessible for everyone to enjoy, disabled folks and all. Equity, equity everywhere.
I'll be succinct at first and then I'll probably go on, but ideally my end goal would, I don't know who said this the first time, I think I heard that work, but working myself out of a job, such a good job at what we do that we're no longer needed. But yeah, like more jobs in this field, real changes to the policies on a local level, on a state level, on a national level. Land access, I don't think we've talked about that much tonight, but like there are people who want to be farmers, and if you don't have land in your yard ready, it's just I've known people who have tried and given up after a few years because they're renting land, and they're working full-time jobs or part-time jobs while farming full-time, and it's impossible to break into any type of farming, let alone small-scale sustainable agriculture, without access to land. And yeah, I think I wanted to be a farmer when I was younger, and then I saw that happen again and again, and it's just like, nah, I want to have good knees in 10 years from now, and like money in the, like a little bit of savings at least. But that would be amazing to see policies surrounding like subsidies and all of those things, that the things that make our industrial food system tick that most people aren't really aware that are even going on. Seeing all of those things really change would be amazing. I could say more, but I'll just stop there because everyone's got like bedtime at some point. So how about you?
It cut out. I didn't hear who you asked to go next.
You.
Oh, okay. Matt Freeman, he, him, his, Chief Operating Officer. Dream for Omaha. Not the absence of injustice, but the presence of justice. Like a world that's wholly and entirely different than the one that we can fathom and recognize. And like that's, I don't know, that's like big and broad and sweeping. One thing that is like also really apparent, I feel like is important to acknowledge, is like as well-meaning and earnest white folks, we're real late to the conversation in a lot of areas, and like following the lead of people of color, BIPOC folks, is I think incredibly important. You know, if you come across an idea, somebody's been talking about it for 50 years, 100 years. It's not new. And that's something that I've realized in my time in this work, and something that I want to throw out anytime I get the chance to. So I would sign off there. Nathan, Jamie?
Matt went broad and big. I'll go really small. My dream for Omaha would be a food garden in every yard, and possibly every front yard, to be more specific. We waste so many resources on grass, on lawns that serve absolutely no purpose. Zero. Like I can't think of what my lawn has ever done for me. But we need to be growing food in our yards and taking care of our own little pieces of earth and right where we are. And one way of nurturing and caring for the land that we inhabit is by feeding our soil and growing food. Nathan?
I guess I'd like to see for Omaha a local food system that is a catalyst and an agent for equity, instead of our current food system that essentially ranches people for profit for the industrial food system and for the industrial healthcare system. I don't know that I'll live to see that. I'm old. But in one way or another, I'm gonna do my damnedest to move towards that for the years I have left. So yeah, for our food system to be an agent for justice and not a stumbling block to it, I guess is where what I'd like to see.
Well, thank you for all of those dreams and for all of your sharing and for all of the work that and the hours and the care and the passion that each of you put into the garden, and for all of the staff present and past who have nurtured it into this presence. I've been, as a United Methodist pastor, on the able to watch the garden grow, like the big garden really grow from what Nathan was talking about with that maybe first goal of 12 gardens to something that's flourishing in more spaces and places than probably anyone could have imagined at the very beginning. So I give thanks for everyone's leadership. I give thanks for all of the work. And if anybody has questions about the big garden, I believe that you can reach out to any of these kind folks and that they would be glad to connect more deeply. And if you need resources or support, please let us know how we can connect. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone, and to all a good night.